Getting up close and intimate. Totally not taboo with Tracy. Celebrating sexual positivity both in and outside the bedroom.
Hi, learner lovers. I'm Tracy. Welcome to Totally Not Taboo at your media. Hashtag where you are. This is where we get to talk about all things sex and sexuality. I'm a social worker in private practice, specializing in intimacy and relationship coaching. Today, we'll be talking about a very interesting topic about chemsex. I will be presenting you with an academic look at what chemsex is, and then we'll be moving to an experiential account of this growing concern. My first guest today is Naeem Cassim. He is a PhD candidate originally from Johannesburg and moved to Cape Town in 2007. He has been in banking for the last 14 years and at the same time pursued his studies in psychology, completing a degree and postgrad in counseling psychology at UNISA. Due to his continued passion for psychology and motivated by his drive and commitment to help others, he embarked on a master's degree with specialization in research psychology. He's especially interested in challenges that continue to affect the LGBTIQ plus community. And 4 years ago, he began research on the chemsex phenomenon, which is fast becoming a global concern. He is currently completing his thesis titled Managing the Boundary, Normative Morality, Hedonism, and Utilitarianism in the Lives of Gay Men Who Combine Sex and Drug Use. So welcome, Naeem. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, Tracy. Thank you very much for having me.
So, Naeem, you are a research psychologist and PhD candidate.
That's correct.
What led you to take chemsex as a research topic?
So Tracy, as you mentioned in the biography, 4 years ago, when I finished my honors in psychology, it was encountered in psychology. The true story is I met somebody, and when you fall hopelessly in love with someone, and as time goes by, you learn more and more about the person. And sometimes by the time you uncover the entire story, the entire truth, it's a bit too late. And so my truth or my revelation in my relationship was that I dated somebody who was quite heavily involved in chemsex for many years, for about 15 years before us. And subsequent to that, and as I was very new learning about what chemsex is, and it almost sort of opened my eyes to a whole different world, to an entire different concept. And as you navigate through this life, especially in a gay homosexual society community, I began to uncover that there were a lot more other people similar to my ex at the time. And so, when you finish your honors, you decide, okay, I'm going to do my master's. I wanted to continue my master's degree, and you have to select a topic. And one of the topics were to question about marginalized communities at risk. And so I one day had a conversation and I asked him, well, can you tell me why? Why do you do this? What brought this about? And his answer was, I don't really know. We got to unpack that over the years. And I thought, well, what a perfect opportunity to sort of go and investigate and figure out the prevalence of this. Is it happening just to him, or there are many other people? And throughout my master's study, I discovered that chemsex is a growing phenomenon in South Africa. It's becoming very prominent, and in South Africa and throughout the world. And so that was my initial motivation, and it's been 4 years now, and I'm, like you said, I'm doing a PhD, unpacking the subject a lot more, and it's been it's been really interesting, very insightful, and I think there's a lot that can come out of this.
Great. So, you've sent me a lot of information, so I really understand the concept. And in the studio today, we have another guest, Jarrod Prinsloo, and I'll give you some of his information afterwards. And I realized that you have a time constraint, so we're going to leave you, unfortunately. Well, you're going to leave us, unfortunately, shortly. But what I understand, firstly, let me ask you, did you ever attend any of these sex chem parties as a matter of, as part of your research, or did you ever want to investigate for yourself?
Personally, no. I cannot say that I went through the last 4 years without the temptation or the curiosity to want to engage. But then my personal reason or value is no, I choose not to do it. But I definitely have learned enough to understand why others do it and what motivates them to do it. And the thesis that I'm busy with is about managing the boundary, and one of those boundaries is being able to say no, it's not for me specifically, but also not to stand in judgment of those who are doing it. And a big motivation for why I've chosen Chemsex specifically, because it's something that has not been spoken about before. There are no other studies, no other academic studies in South Africa that talks about Chemsex. We've had a couple of blogs, a couple of articles on Mamba Online. I think 702 did a talk on Chemsex, and there's a few other journals that relates to HIV and Chemsex. But there's nothing that really talks about understanding why. So to answer your question, no, I have never done it. I've observed many things. I don't think we have enough time to share with you all my observations. And like I said, I've been in a relationship with somebody who was actively engaging in Chemsex, so I've seen a lot of things.
Okay. So from a psychological perspective, can you share with us what you've observed? I know that there is a consequence psychologically. Yes. And having spoken to gay men about their experiences in Chemsex, being involved in Chemsex, what I have learned from them is that there is a come down afterwards. There are also other consequences. For example, they cannot have sober sex without the influences of the drugs. And I've realized as I'm speaking that we haven't actually spoken about what Chemsex actually is.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a good point to start. So Chemsex is the term is actually using the combination of certain psychoactive drugs before or while having sex. So very common in South Africa would be crystal methamphetamine, commonly known as stick, or it would be GHB. And sometimes it's used together. In some cases, with some participants, it's just crystal methamphetamine. And in some cases, there's a combination of weed, so dacha, so they'll smoke dacha as well as use crystal and GHB. Yeah, it also depends on which country you're in. So, for example, in the UK, they include a drug called methadone. So they use methadone as well, but that's not very prominent in South Africa. So South Africa, the very common drugs is crystal meth and GHB.
Okay.
And it's used before or while having sex.
Is alcohol used as well in the mix?
Yes, alcohol also used in the mix, yes.
Okay.
But the drug that gives you the pleasure, the feeling of euphoria, it gives you the sexual drive, that is your crystal meth. That's the crystal methamphetamine and then the GHB. Alcohol's just there, in most cases, it's always just there.
And what exactly happens at these chemsex parties for our viewers or our audience who don't actually know what this is actually about practically?
Okay. From my observations and my many interviews with many people, it differs for everybody, but typically I'll use myself as just to explain it. I want to get high tonight. I want to have sex. And the motivation for that is various reasons. It's either that I'm somewhat lonely, I need to feel a bit of a connection, or in most cases it's that, there's a loneliness, there's an emptiness, there's a need for connection. Once you feel connection, it could also be a result of an addiction, that they've become addicted to the drug as well. So I then decide to go and get some crystal for myself. Either I approach a dealer, or I get it through a friend, or I go into Manhunt or Grindr, and I look out for, and I start searching for guys, and I get invited to somebody's house, or somebody gets invited to my house. And usually you ask the person, are you into chems, as an example, and sometimes it's quite upfront, it's on Grindr or Manhunt, which is your gay dating apps, and you ask the person if they're into chems, and they'll say yes, and then you agree to meet the person. And it depends on what the guy is into. So when you initially take the crystal methamphetamine, you can either snort it, so you can snuff it, or you can have it injected, which is what is commonly called a slamming, or or you smoke it. So you put it into like a little lollipop, and you smoke it. The effects varies or differs. Smoking and snorting would usually give you a high, and it lasts for about 8 hours. When you slam, it's far more potent, so you'll get an immediate rush, and you'll get a far intense high, and you become a lot more sexually aroused. It's also considered to be a lot more dangerous because it's far more addictive. It goes directly to your bloodstream, and then the effects are almost immediate. So we assume the person has now ingested some crystal meth, and has taken some GHB, and in between is drinking or smoking. And for most of the participants that I've interviewed, it's almost as if they transcend into someone different. So now the psyche is all about looking for pleasure, finding sex. You could you can get invited to a party and play where there's a group of between 6 and 8 guys together. Usually they all get undressed, and they all want to be naked. They want to enjoy the sense of feeling connected with one's body. And again, the psychological reason for that is very different. The motivation behind why somebody would engage in a party and play or chemsex orgy is very different for each person, and perhaps we can talk about that in a bit. But what happens at these places is a lot of sex. It's about becoming completely disinhibited. So if I feel like as a sober person, I'm not comfortable perhaps receiving penetration, if I can say that, or I'm not comfortable doing certain sexual fetishes or acting on certain acts, for example, bondage, being tied up. But I want to do it, as a sober man sitting here talking to you, my desire, as an example, is I would really like to be tied up, or I would really like to have penetrative sex, but I don't because I'm suffering from internalized homophobia, or I'm too afraid, or I feel I'm going to be rejected by somebody, or for various other reasons. When I take the crystal and the GHB, all that goes away. So all my fears, all my insecurities, all my inhibitions fall out of the window, and I simply go out and I act on my deepest desires, my deepest fear. I do what I want. I enjoy it to its fullest extent. So it's almost like medicating me, so that I could be sexually satisfied or sexually enjoy my sexual pleasures. And things that I've seen, my goodness, I've seen people like completely naked, and multiple people having sex with different people all together. I've seen guys slam, inject one another. I've seen guys fist one another. So there's a lot of things that I've seen in the last 4 years. And that's just situational. You know people who trust you, so they welcome you into the space. And then I think in terms of being a PhD student, it's important that I manage my boundaries. My boundaries is that I'm here as an academic. Never get tempted into that. Not to say that temptation wasn't in the way, but yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. So what are the risks? I'm sure as you know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about a whole lot of risks going on. Would you like to share some of those?
Yeah, I think the common risks, and you must understand, it's because you're disinhibited. So it's because um, you're probably not thinking rationally. You're more focused about the sexual pleasure, the sexual gratification. So as you become more disinhibited, your risk level is higher. So for example, they would use that have sex without a condom. You'd share a needle. Some guys who are HIV positive would forget to take their medication. Post having condomless sex, you find that certain guys would not go and get PrEP, so they won't go and seek um, pre-sexual medication or help at a clinic. And some guys would, for example, not use that PrEP. So the more disinhibited they become, the less risky. But again, it's not the same for everybody. Some people are very careful about that. So they would only engage with one particular person, or they'd only go when they're high on crystal. They would usually only engage with the person that they know. So they'll hook up with someone they know. And usually some guys have like 2 or 3 regular guys that they know. I've had conversations with men where they say that they are on PrEP and they've been on PrEP for a good couple of years. So it reduces the risk or completely nullifies the risk of being HIV or getting HIV, but there are the risk of other venereal diseases that you can get that's not protected by PrEP. So the thing is, there's no prevalence or quantitative study that says X amount of people in South Africa don't use PrEP or have high risk HIV chemsex sessions, or the 1 in 4 gay men. We don't have such studies. But in my view, I don't think that is the most important thing. I think it's about understanding the individual. It's about understanding why each person makes the decision for him or for himself, and how that person can reduce the risk for themselves. So when I speak, it's not in general. I'm not talking about the entire population or community. It's basically just what I've observed. But there are other guys who are very careful and cautious about it.
Sorry to interrupt you here, but I know what PrEP is, but can you tell our audience what PrEP is?
Okay, so PrEP it's a long word, pre-exposure. I'm not going to pronounce that for you now, but it's a medication that is used by gay men, and it prevents you from acquiring HIV. So if I have bareback or condomless sex, so condomless sex without a condom, or as we call it in our community, barebacking, which is widely preferred. They can do that without the risk of acquiring HIV. So I can have sex with somebody who's HIV positive, and I'm on PrEP, and more than likely I won't become positive. So it's a harm reduction medication.
Thank you for clearing that up. I do appreciate that. So there's something else that I read from the information you sent me is that chemsex happens between gay men and also between MSM.
Yes.
So can you tell us what MSM is?
So MSM is abbreviated as men who have sex with men. So yes, chemsex happens between gay men. Now, I'm a gay guy, but then you also have men who don't define themselves as gay, but they have sex with other men. Again, the reason for that varies. We can talk about that a bit later. But it's just typically defined as a guy who doesn't consider himself to be gay. He goes to places like the Hot House, which is a gay sauna in Cape Town, or the Rec Room in Johannesburg, various other places. And he goes and he enjoys having sex with men. Some of these guys go home to their wives. Others go back into the closet, as you will say, for various reasons. But it's defined as a guy having sex with men.
So are you saying that they're closeted gays, but they just haven't come out yet?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting concept. So My last real question before we move on to Jarrod is, well, it's not really a question, it's a statement that maybe you can clarify, is that what I understand from the crux of your research is that we're not really talking about the moral issue around whether we condone gay sex or whether we condone chemsex per se. It's really just around the addictive aspect of what the result of chemsex is, and that is about addiction, drug addiction.
Yes.
And that we need to, as a society, set up support structures for these men who are at risk of developing drug addiction. And
Yes.
it doesn't always, the men who participate don't always become addicts, drug
No.
addicts,
Yes.
but it can very well lead to drug addiction. And therefore, we need, as a society, to be able to support them in terms of psychological support, in terms of medical support, warning them of the dangers of chemsex, for example, not sharing needles, remembering to take their PrEP, using condoms, and then, of course, the psychological effects, which is what I actually started speaking to you about before we actually clarified what chemsex is. So can you tell us a little bit more about the crux of what I've...
Thank you. Yes, I think so. So I'll talk about my PhD that addresses what you mentioned. It's about managing the boundaries. So yes, I think it's chemsex is here. It's here to stay. It's being done in South Africa and across the world. The prevalence of it we don't quite know in South Africa, so we don't know how many people are doing it. I think the important thing is to understand, how do we manage the boundaries? It's not about the morality of it or anything like that. It's about how do you manage the boundaries. How do we focus more on having a safer chemsex? So it's not about stopping it or about trying to get everybody off chemsex. So if I'm a chemsex user, it is, how do I prevent myself from becoming addicted? And if I am addicted, what do I do? What support structures are there out there for me? How do I go to what counseling is available? What does government offer me? If I want to go into PrEP because I want to have, I'm using chemsex, I'm having bareback sex, condomless sex. What measures are there in place for me to prevent me from becoming HIV positive? So I think that's the focus it should be about. It shouldn't be about saying abstinence. It's about abstinence. Let's all abstain from chemsex, because that's not it. You can't tell a person what to do. It's impossible. You can't tell an adult what to do, but you can invite me to practice, or to be more careful, or to be more cautious about certain things. So that's the one part of what I'm trying to of the thesis, what I'm trying to study, one part of my study. And then we look at the morality of it. So, what is society's views on chemsex? And we try and break down that stigma. And what you and I are doing now is breaking down the stigma. If somebody listens to our interview and their cultural view of chemsex and drugs is somewhat changed, then we've achieved something. So we want to break down, and we're only going to achieve this by having conversations, by writing articles, by doing interviews. That's the only way this normative morality on what is considered right and wrong in terms of drugs will change. And then we look at hedonism and utilitarianism. And that is, for example, taking some pleasures out of chemsex. I may not have ever done it in my life, but I've observed and I've listened to many people over the last 4 years, and it brings them some pleasure, it brings them some joy. And who am I, and who are you, who are we to say, stop doing that, stop doing the joy? But what we should be doing from an academic perspective, from a government perspective, anybody who's invested in chemsex, we should be saying that if you're going to do it, just be careful about it. Identify your own risk. Know that if you put yourself in a risky situation, if, for example, you've had condomless sex, go the next morning, go to a clinic and get PrEP, which is what you take after having condomless sex. or get yourself on PrEP, or try and refrain from sharing a needle. So put these measures in place. If you find that you are addicted, go and speak to somebody. Not a program that's going to say don't do it, but perhaps have a program where somebody understands why you are doing it. It's very, very important to understand why the person is doing it. Jarrod's story would be different to somebody else that I introduce you to. And if we can understand the why, then we'll know how to deal with it. And that's very important. I think that's the crux. It's not a qualitative, it's a quantitative study. It's about understanding how. And when we understand the how, thank you. When we understand the how, we can then develop a support, a structure, a program for dealing with how to deal with it. That better deals with chemsex as a phenomenon in South Africa and across the world. And I think that's important.
Absolutely agree. And I completely agree with you that we need to have conversations because we need to educate the public about what's going on in society at large. And as you say, breaking down the stigmas and the taboo.
Yes.
Naeem, I want to thank you very, very much for
My
being
pleasure.
available to talk to us this morning. And you've been a wealth of information, and I wish you so much success for your PhD.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Are you still looking for candidates to interview, or is that complete?
Yes, I am. I'm in the process of interviewing participants or people who are engaging in chemsex specifically. So I've got a long road ahead of me throughout the year. So yes, I'm still actually looking for people who are open to talk about their experiences. It's a conversation. Just want to hear their story.
Great. So if any of our audience would like to get in touch with you, is there a website or somehow they can get hold of you, or would you suggest that they get hold of me and then I get in touch with you?
They could get in touch with you, but they also welcome to send me a WhatsApp. I can give you my number. You could perhaps, is it okay if I share my cell number with everybody?
I think let's not do that publicly. Let me rather post it. Well,
Okay.
Let's talk about that. Yeah. My suggestion would be, if there's somebody who is interested in being a participant in your study, your research, then let them contact me and then I'll contact you.
Perfect. That sounds good. We can do that.
But as I said again, I wish you much success. And again, thank you so much for adding.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So welcome, Jarrod Prinsloo.
Thank you.
Jarrod is a friend of mine, and so I'm very lucky to be so networked with amazing people in my life, and to be able to chat to them and have them share their experiences with me. Just to give you a little bit of an insight into who Jarrod is. Jarrod is a recovering addict who's been clean for several years. He is a gay man who, during active addiction, would frequent chemsex parties on a regular basis. Jarrod says, quote, he is currently exploring new ways to introduce chaos into his life. He grew up in Johannesburg, attended high school in the Natal Midlands, spent way too many years at the University of Pretoria, obtaining degrees in various disciplines and bad decisions, only to come back to Joburg and join the corporate rat race. He is currently navigating life without the influence of drugs and alcohol, while also hoping to be accepted by a homosexual, polyamorous community. So, Jarrod, serious, but not serious. We've heard from Naeem, who gave us an academic report on chemsex, and you have been very involved in that community. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your experiences of chemsex?
Thanks, Trace. Listening to Naeem his description and his experience and observations was spot on. It's participating in these chemsex parties and participating in chemsex in general. There's just many different reasons why we participate in them and why we do it. And it's to kind of classify chemsex as one party wouldn't do it justice, because every party is different, every weekend is different, or weeknights is different. It changes from the types of drugs you use to the type of participants that are involved, to where you are in life at the time. It's what Naeem brought in was that disinhibition, and being disinhibited, and that to me was kind of the crux of chemsex, and the huge attraction is just being completely disinhibited, and kind of exploring sexual activity that I wouldn't normally have participated in, and observing sexual activity that it may have not been what I was into, but at these chemsex parties, there's 10, 12, 15 people, and kind of just exploring it and just submersing yourself in all of these different fetishes and explorations. Yeah.
Okay. Jarrod, how much exposure did you have to to drugs before you entered the world of chemsex? And I know I'm not, as an interviewer, not supposed to ask two questions in one, but the second part of that question is, did being exposed to chemsex, or being participating in chemsex, did it increase your drug addiction?
So it's quite a loaded question, because I've been to rehab a few times, and the question I always ask myself was I addicted to the sex, or was I addicted to the drugs? And at the end, it was so inextricably linked that I couldn't differentiate between sex and drugs. So definitely the drug addiction started first. It started with the lighter drugs, alcohol. I've never been a weed person, but it actually started with prescription drugs, with Ritalin. While I was studying, I needed something to help me study, and I got hooked on that, and the next best thing was cocaine after that. It slowly moved over to the cats, and then eventually the crystal meth and the GHB. So yeah, I think at the end, I could not take drugs without having sex, and I could not have sex without taking drugs. They very much are linked, especially in the gay community. I think I don't want to say in the gay community, because I think drugs are so prevalent everywhere. I think if we look hard enough and properly, everywhere we go, there's people battling with drug addiction. I think the sex aspect is very prominent in the gay community, though. I think there are a lot of people that can participate in chemsex and that aren't addicts per se, that can, come to a party, enjoy it, have fun, and stop using that night. Whereas there's a lot of people, such as myself, who didn't know when to stop, and we couldn't stop, and the come downs were just worse and worse and worse, and we were not kind of trying to escape our lives, but then we were eventually just trying to escape the come down and the feelings of guilt and shame after these chemsex parties.
So can you give us an idea about the deep, dark experiences that you had, if you would like to share them with us?
There's so many, and a lot of people might think, would hear what goes on and think it's totally normal and it's fine and it's their fetish. The amounts of parties that I've participated in, everything becomes normalized. So it's group sex and orgies was my norm. it just became so normal to me that I actually battled to have a one-on-one relationship or one-on-one sex with my partners. That I because of Chemsex, I had to introduce multiple partners into my relationship. So that distorted it a lot. Within these parties, there's, as Naeem said, it's slamming, it's injecting one another. A lot of these people aren't medical professionals, and some of them are medical professionals. I think there's a huge misconception that drug addicts are the people that we see on the park benches. It's not that at all. The people I'm educated. The people I used with were educated. We have good jobs. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen, and obviously the consequences eventually do catch up. But the type of parties and the type of people that are using are our everyday people. It's not happening in some dungeon in the sense of Johannesburg. It's happening in the suburbs, in Sandton or Bryanston, wherever you are. So, the stuff that I experienced and witnessed, I've been there where people have been completely unconscious. I've been unconscious. I've been gang raped at one of these parties and had to deal with that. And I've seen other guys be completely out of it. One of the things with G and with GHB is a drug that they take is you shouldn't drink alcohol with it. What happens is a lot of people do, or what they've done is they've drank alcohol before the party and then they've launched G. So when you talk about launch G is they insert the drug into their anus and it's got a better absorption. So I've seen that tons of times. I've seen people that aren't able to give consent. I think that's the scariest part. I think I've seen people that haven't been comfortable with what was going on, but either their friends are there or their partner is taking part in it. It just gets more extreme. I think that's what Chemsex is all about. Is once you've tried something, it becomes mundane, and you have to try something new. And it's something of more and more. You'll be sitting at these parties. There'll be 10 naked guys in the room, and there'll be porn on, but everybody will sitting on their phones on Grindr or a hookup site, wanting to get more guys over, wanting it to be more debaucherous, wanting to change locations. So people can just be debased more or take it to a new extreme.
And I've also heard of a lot of prostitution happening, underage sex. Is that quite prevalent?
I think there's definitely in the gay community they're called rent boys. Definitely, there's a lot. I think what happens a lot of the time is these boys or these young men get addicted to drugs and they use these chemsex parties to supply their drug addiction, and then also to make an income. Obviously, I've got a few friends that were rent boys. And I've gone to some of their clients with them. I've never been paid for sex, and I don't judge sex work at all. But it's something that supports their habit, and it's really something that they fit into so well. When all these guys are also disinhibited and are high and are horny, they are willing to pay for sex. It's eating the low-hanging fruit. So if there is a rent boy there, there definitely.
So Jarrod, what was your turning moment? What was your aha moment, or your, the light bulb moment in your life that kind of turned you around, decided that you had had enough?
So, I identify as an addict, and I've always understood that I'm a drug addict. But I think it's when you accept and realize that enough is enough. There was something that I was running from, I was trying to escape from, and no matter how many rehabs I'd gone to, how many chemsex parties I had attended, the consequences never ever seemed prevalent or harsh enough. And the last time I was actually at a party a Chemsex party, and there was a female there, funny enough. And she was in another room, and she had a heart attack. And fortunately, one of the people I was using with was a doctor. They resuscitated her, and the ambulance came and collected this lady and took her off to the hospital. And me and this other guy just kind of looked at each other and went back inside and carried on using. And that's not the first time I've seen something like that or been exposed to something like that. But I remember sitting there thinking, I'm going to be next. This is going to be me. I think at that point in my life, my family didn't want anything to do with me. I had no friends. My life was just all about using and finding more debaucherous ways to hurt myself. And I came to the conclusion that I didn't want to do that anymore. And I didn't want to die an addict. I think I didn't want to die an addict in active addiction. I didn't want to have a funeral and my family be embarrassed and everybody knowing how I died was due to an overdose or something like that. So, yeah, it's definitely after making that decision, then it's seeking help again, and then it's getting into recovery and finding other recovering addicts, and starting that recovery journey and realizing that you can have sex sober. I think that was a big thing for me. I was so scared. I was so worried, and I think for the first 3 months, I never had sex, and I was ashamed. I felt guilty. I felt dirty. It's also, as Naeem said, it's going and getting tested and getting all your STD checks and making sure that you are, if you're going to be a sex positive person, you also need to be a healthy person and make sure you enter the community as knowing your status and all of that.
100%. Do you miss the lifestyle?
I do. Sometimes I do. I think the honest answer, and my gut wants to say no. My honest answer is yes. There are some days, I think as a gay man, we don't like to be vulnerable. I've grown up with self-esteem issues. I've grown up with self-confidence issues, and the chems or the crystal meth and the GHB took all of that away. So it took me a long time to realize that I am good enough. I can have sex sober. I can explore different sexual activities without the use of drugs. In sobriety, I have attended a sex party, a chemsex party, and it was eye-opening. I think I've attended 2, and it's scary in a way because, as Naeem also said, as soon as these people use, and I say these people, that was me, but as soon as we use, their whole persona changes. Their personality is, and it's really scary. And I knew that I was the same. So I do miss the being disinhibited. I miss not caring what anyone thought. The public group sex, I do miss. But I've also taught myself and through therapy and that have learned that I can still do stuff like that. I just need to be safe and I just need to be careful about the addiction, because as soon as I start using drugs again, that whole downward spiral just starts all over again.
Well, I think you're incredibly brave and brave on so many aspects. Firstly, going back into the environment, chemsex environments, as a recovering addict. Sorry, something's happened to my tongue, and exposing yourself to the risks, but still being able to separate the fun or the fun without being triggered. And very, very brave for agreeing to come on to this show with me and for sharing so much of your personal experiences. I think you're just a superstar, and I'm so proud of you for your sobriety And I wish you a clean and serene day for the rest of your life. And I'm just proud to call you my friend as well.
Thank you.
And I find this this topic very, very interesting. And I'm just would like to reach out to other addicts or other people who are suffering with the silence around the taboo, talking about, not feeling like they can talk about drug addiction and the fact that they might be in trouble in any which way possible, that they can contact me on my website, www.totallyme.co.za, or on any social media platforms at Totally Me Tracy. So I'm signing out now, and I want to again thank my guests, Jarrod Prinsloo and Naeem Kasim. If you want to contact any of them, please do so on any of my platforms, and I will get them to contact you back. That's the end of the episode for today. Have an awesome one.